Welcome to Sleepy Time Stories. Hey dear friends, tonight we're traveling back into the dreamy, misty, flower-powered atmosphere of the 1960s and 70s, the age of hippie collectives. Not the social media filtered flower crown and music festival version. I mean the genuine, actual communes, muddy, hopeful, and forever running out of toilet paper. So before you get cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. A massive thank you to the viewer who recommended this topic. Your idea helped shape tonight's journey, and I'm sincerely grateful. Leave a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Somehow it's always 2 a.m. somewhere. And hey, the channel's now available on Spotify too. Check the link in the description if you'd like to listen there. Now, lower those lights, turn on a fan for that gentle background hum. Get comfortable, and maybe tuck your feet in so the imaginary bedbugs can't bite your toes. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what commune life truly felt like? Was there really that much free love, or just a lot of awkward mornings? Did anyone actually know how to farm, or were they just improvising with a copy of the whole Earth catalogue and a wish? What did they eat when the lentils disappeared? Could you survive weeks without plumbing, privacy, or a single moment of solitude? Would you last a day sharing a yurt with a dozen strangers who all believe they're enlightened? Or would you accidentally start a philosophical war over whose turn it was to empty the compost toilet? And now, congratulations, you've just awakened in a hippie commune. The year is 1972. You have no shoes, a very suspicious rash. Oh, and you're already expected at the morning group meditation. Best of luck. Let's discuss why anyone thought living in a commune was a good idea. The 1960s were chaotic. Vietnam, civil rights battles, corporate monotony, suburban suffocation. Young people wanted out. They wanted purpose, truth, connection. Communes promised freedom from materialism, escape from the establishment, and a chance to live in harmony with nature and each other. It sounded beautiful, almost biblical. But here's the thing. Most people who joined communes had zero survival skills, no farming experience, and a wildly optimistic belief that love and good energy could replace plumbing. Picture this. You're 23 years old, fresh out of college or maybe a dropout. And you're standing in your parents' split-level suburban home, staring at a future that looks like a slow death by necktie. Your dad works at IBM. Your mum takes Valium. The television buzzes with news of body counts in Southeast Asia. Everyone around you is getting married, buying cars on credit, and pretending everything's fine. But it's not fine. Nothing's fine. So when your friend Dave, who just returned from San Francisco with flowers in his hair and a pamphlet about a commune in New Mexico, tells you there's another way to live, you listen. He talks about shared work, OOP decisions, natural gardens, and a life where money doesn't matter. Where you wake up to birdsong instead of alarm clocks. Where your value isn't measured by your paycheck but by your soul. It sounds like everything the modern world isn't. It sounds like deliverance. The communes promised to be families you selected, not the ones you were born into. They promised that you could raise your own food, build your own home, create your own rules. No landlords, no bosses, no taxes, or at least fewer of them. You'd live simply in touch with the land, connected to something genuine. You'd read poetry by firelight and make love under the stars. You'd be liberated. It's like trying to launch a tech startup with a dream board and no actual programming skills. Everyone had big ideas and almost no one had practical experience. The truth. Most commune founders were middle-class kids playing at poverty. They romanticized rural life without understanding that farming is exhausting, technical, and merciless. They believed that good intentions could replace knowledge. That communal living would naturally sort itself out, and that rejecting capitalism meant they didn't need a functional economy. Spoiler, they did. But in that moment, standing in that suburban living room with the shag carpet and the ticking clock, none of that mattered. The dream was hypnotic, and so you packed a backpack, said goodbye to your bewildered parents, and headed west or north or south to a plot of land where 20 other dreamers, just like you, were waiting. You had no idea what you were doing. Neither did they, but you were doing it together, and that felt like enough. It wasn't until you arrived, muddy, cold, and facing a dilapidated barn that was supposed to be your new home, that the gap between fantasy and reality started to appear. But by then, you'd already committed. You'd burned the bridges you were in. You can't start a commune without land. And in the 60s and 70s, land was affordable if you were willing to accept the middle of nowhere as your new address. Some groups pooled money from trust funds, others squatted on abandoned properties, and a few just showed up in rural America with a dream and a van. The land was usually remote, often marginal, dry, rocky, or swampy, perfect for idealists who'd never grown a tomato. Still, they signed the papers, planted a flag, and called it freedom. Finding land was the first test of how serious you truly were. If you had money, maybe from parents who didn't understand but still loved you, or a small inheritance from a sympathetic aunt, you could actually buy property. In the late 60s, you could get 40 acres in rural Oregon, Northern California, or the mountains of Tennessee for a few $1,000s. It wasn't prime real estate. It was the land nobody else wanted. Steep hillsides or desert scrub, flood-prone valleys. But it was yours. Some groups got creative. They'd pool resources, 5 people putting in $500 each, forming a collective trust and buying land together. This required paperwork which was deeply uncool but necessary. Others found benefactors, older radicals, sympathetic landowners, or organizations that believed in the movement and were willing to donate or lease land cheaply. A few communes like the farm in Tennessee managed to purchase large tracts and build something that lasted. Then there were the squatters. These were the true believers, the ones who didn't have money or didn't believe in private property anyway. Like they'd find abandoned homesteads, forgotten plots, or land owned by absentee landlords, and just move in. Sometimes it worked for months, even years. Other times, sheriffs showed up with eviction notices and everyone had to scatter like rabbits. It's like buying a fixer-upper, except the house is a field and the fixer-upper is your entire lifestyle. Location mattered more than people realized at first. If you were too remote, you'd struggle to get supplies, access medical care, or connect with the outside world. But if you were too close to town, you'd face suspicion, harassment, and nosy neighbors calling the cops every time someone played the bongos after 9 p.m. The sweet spot was rural but accessible, close enough to civilization to survive, far enough to be left alone. The land itself was rarely what they imagined. Brochures and word-of-mouth painted pictures of fertile soil and babbling brooks. Reality was more like rocky ground, intermittent streams, and soil so depleted it couldn't grow weeds. The dream was a Garden of Eden. The reality was a geology lesson in why certain land stays cheap. But none of that mattered on day one. When you first pulled up in your painted VW bus, when you stepped out onto land that was legally or spiritually yours, it felt like victory. You were standing on the edge of a new world. The old one was behind you. All you had to do now was build. Of course, building required skills, tools, money, and time, but you'd worry about that later. For now, you had land. You had a dream. You had a circle of friends passing around a joint talking about where the garden would go, where the main house would be, and what you'd name this place. Freedom Farm, Morning Star, the People's Land. The names were hopeful, defiant, poetic. The land didn't care what you called it. It just waited to see if you could actually make it work. Forget about architects or building codes. Commune shelter was DIY in the most optimistic sense of the term. Some folks built geodesic domes inspired by Buckminster Fuller, beautiful in theory, leaky in practice. Others lived in yurts, teepees, or converted school buses. A few just pitched tents and called it home. Insulation optional, privacy a capitalist construct. The goal was to live simply, but the reality was often just cold, damp, and riddled with spiders. Housing on a commune wasn't about comfort, it was about philosophy. You weren't supposed to need much. 4 walls and a roof. That's what the system wanted you to depend on. True freedom meant living close to the earth, unburdened by possessions and open to the elements. Great in theory, miserable in practice, especially in February. The geodesic dome became the architectural symbol of the commune movement, thanks to Buckminster Fuller's vision of efficient futuristic living. Domes were supposed to be easy to build, structurally sound, and energy efficient. They looked incredible, like something from a science fiction movie. Communards studied Fuller's blueprints, bought materials, and started building. Then the rain came. Turns out sealing a dome so it doesn't leak is incredibly difficult. Every seam, every panel joint, every spot where triangles meet is a potential water entry point. People woke up to puddles inside their space-age homes. Then came the snow, which piled up and caused structural stress no one had calculated. And don't even talk about insulation. Most domes were poorly insulated, which meant freezing in winter and baking in summer. It's like IKEA furniture, but you designed it yourself, and it might collapse. Yurts were another popular option borrowed from Mongolian nomadic culture. They were relatively easy to build, a circular wooden frame covered with canvas or felt. Yurts were portable, aesthetically pleasing, and deeply connected to indigenous wisdom, or at least that's what people told themselves. In reality, they were drafty, offered zero soundproofing, and required constant maintenance. But they were cheap, and you could set one up in a weekend, so they became a commune staple. Teepees followed similar logic, romantic, traditional, and utterly impractical for year-round living. They looked beautiful, silhouetted against the sunset, but they were cold, cramped, and you couldn't stand up straight unless you were in the very center. Still, people lived in them, huddled around small fires, pretending this was authenticity and not just discomfort with a narrative. Then there were the school buses, converted vans, and repurposed chicken coops. Some people got genuinely creative, building A-frame cabins from scrap lumber or digging into hillsides to create earth-sheltered homes. A few even tried building with cob, straw bales, or adobe, methods that actually worked if you knew what you were doing. Most didn't. Privacy was the first casualty. Communes rejected the nuclear family model, which meant communal sleeping arrangements were common. Yeah, you'd have 10 people sharing one large room, separated only by hanging blankets or sheer optimism. Personal space was selfish. Your body was just a temporary vessel. Yeah, good luck maintaining that philosophy when someone's snoring at 3 a.m. The lack of proper shelter took a toll. People got sick, colds, flu, pneumonia. Belongings got ruined by moisture. Relationships strained under the constant exposure to each other. And yet, people endured because shelter wasn't the point. The point was liberation. Even if that liberation came with a leaky roof and a side of mildew. Indoor plumbing, that's something the system wanted you to depend on. Communes rejected it, at least at first. Instead, you got outhouses, composting toilets, or just a designated corner of the woods. Bathing meant a cold river, a solar shower if you were lucky, and/or just not bathing. Personal hygiene became optional, then forgotten. And when 20 people share one hand-dug latrine in the August heat, you learn very quickly that idealism has a smell. Let's start with the toilet situation because nothing strips away romantic idealism faster than the question, where do I poop? Most communes started without outhouses, wooden shacks built over deep pits. If you were lucky, someone remembered to add a door. If you were very lucky, there was toilet paper. Often there wasn't. You'd use leaves, old newspapers, or corn cobs like a pioneer. Splinters were a risk you accepted. The outhouse was also a social space in the worst possible way. You'd sit there, door hanging crooked, flies buzzing, trying to do your business while someone outside yelled about dinner prep. Privacy was not just absent, but it was philosophically rejected. We're all natural beings, man. Except natural beings still prefer to poop alone. Composting toilets were the enlightened option. The idea was brilliant. Human waste mixed with sawdust and time becomes fertilizer. No water needed, no septic system, and you're literally turning waste into food. Except composting toilets require careful maintenance, the right carbon to nitrogen ratio, and someone willing to manage the system. Most communes had none of those things. So, the composting toilet became a smelly box that nobody wanted to deal with until it overflowed. It's like trying to build your own plumbing system after watching one YouTube video, except YouTube didn't exist. Bathing was even more complicated. Rivers and streams were free and beautiful, but also cold, bone-chillingly, gasp-inducingly cold, especially in mountain regions. Some people embraced it as invigorating. Others just stopped bathing. Solar showers, black bags filled with water, and hung in the sun were a popular middle ground. You'd get maybe 2 minutes of lukewarm water before it ran out. Better than nothing, but not by much. In winter, bathing became a rare event. Heating water required firewood, time, and energy. Resources that were always in short supply, so people went weeks, sometimes months, without a proper wash. They smelled like campfires, body odor, and patchouli oil, which was liberally applied to mask the funk. It didn't work. Everyone just smelled like dirty patchouli. The lack of plumbing had serious health consequences. Intestinal parasites spread easily when sanitation was poor. Skin infections festered. Lice, scabies became endemic. People got sick and stayed sick because hygiene was an afterthought. Some communes eventually installed basic plumbing, a hand pump, a grey water system, maybe even a real shower. But it took years, and by then many original members had already left, defeated by the smell. Women faced additional challenges. Menstruation without running water or proper facilities was difficult and isolating. Pregnancy and childbirth on a commune with no plumbing even more so. Some women found solidarity and support in communal living. Others felt abandoned, stuck doing the unglamorous work while men philosophized about freedom. So no, plumbing wasn't just a convenience. It was a necessity. And rejecting it in the name of simplicity didn't make you enlightened. It made you itchy, smelly, and statistically more likely to get dysentery. Welcome to utopia. Now, commune food was a mix of idealism and desperation. The dream, organic gardens bursting with vegetables, fresh bread baked in clay ovens, communal feasts under the stars. The reality, lentils, so many lentils, maybe some brown rice. Occasionally someone would attempt to bake bread, but without proper yeast or skill, it usually came out dense enough to use as a doorstop. And if someone got ambitious and foraged wild mushrooms, well, let's just say not everyone made it to breakfast. Food was supposed to be one of the great victories of commune life. You'd grow your own, eat seasonally, reject industrialized agriculture, and nourish your body with pure, unprocessed fuel. It was going to be beautiful, sustainable, and delicious. Except almost nobody knew how to farm. Gardens were planted with enthusiasm and zero expertise. Thus, people threw seeds into the ground, watered them occasionally, and waited for miracles. Miracles did not arrive. Instead, they got weeds, pests, and soil so depleted it couldn't support a cactus. Turns out farming requires knowledge. Crop rotation, soil amendments, pest management, irrigation, knowing what to plant when, understanding your climate zone. None of this was intuitive. It's like trying to cook a gourmet meal when you've never boiled water. So the gardens failed, or they produced sad, stunted vegetables that wouldn't win any prizes. A few hardy crops survived. Zucchini, kale, and tomatoes if you were lucky, but feeding 20 or 30 people off a half-acre plot of marginal land. Not happening, which meant the commune's diet quickly collapsed into whatever was cheap, shelf-stable, and bought in bulk. Enter the lentils. Brown lentils, red lentils, green lentils, lentils in soup, lentils in stew, lentils mashed into a protein paste, lentils mixed with brown rice, which was the other commune staple. Together they formed the backbone of every meal. Nutritionally complete, sure. Soul-crushingly boring. Absolutely. Bread was a communal aspiration. Someone would find a recipe for whole grain bread, mix flour and water, and attempt to coax yeast into action. Sometimes it worked, and you'd get a dense, heavy loaf that tasted like cardboard, but was at least bread-shaped. Other times, the dough just sat there refusing to rise, and you'd end up with flatbread or crackers or something vaguely edible that nobody wanted to name. Then there was the foraging phase. Inspired by back-to-the-land manuals, people wandered into the woods looking for wild edibles. Dandelion greens, wild garlic, berries, mushrooms. Some of it was safe and delicious. Some of it was toxic. Mushroom identification is a precise science, and that one looks like the picture is not a reliable method. More than a few communards spent miserable nights vomiting after eating the wrong fungi. Protein was always a challenge. Vegetarianism was common, partly for ethical reasons and partly because meat was expensive. A few communes raised chickens or goats. But slaughtering animals required skills and emotional fortitude most people didn't have. So they ate eggs, drank goat milk, and tried not to think about what would happen when the chickens stopped laying. Meals were communal, eaten together around long tables or in circles on the ground. This was supposed to build solidarity. Sometimes it did, other times it just highlighted inequality. Why did Sarah get more bread than me? Who decided Mark could have seconds when there's barely enough for firsts? Food scarcity breeds resentment even in utopia. Malnutrition was real. People lost weight, got weak, developed deficiencies. Scurvy made a minor comeback in some communes because fresh vegetables were rare in winter. Anemia was common, and yet people convinced themselves that hunger was cleansing, that simplicity was virtuous. Right up until someone fainted from low blood sugar and everyone realized maybe we should figure out how to actually feed ourselves. Ah, free love. The cornerstone of commune mythology. In theory, it was beautiful. Love without possession, connection without jealousy. Bodies liberated from societal shame. In practice, it was a soap opera. People got jealous. Hearts got broken. Someone always fell in love with someone who didn't love them back. And when you're living in a 2-room cabin with 15 people, there's no escape from the awkwardness. Free love was free, but it wasn't cheap. The philosophy of free love was deeply rooted in the 60s counterculture. Traditional relationships were seen as possessive, patriarchal, and rooted in capitalist notions of ownership. Marriage was a contract, and contracts were tools of oppression. So communes rejected monogamy in favor of open relationships, polyamory, or just general sexual fluidity. Love was supposed to flow naturally between people without rules or restrictions. Sounds progressive, right? In some ways it was. Free love challenged deeply ingrained social norms and gave people permission to explore desire, identity, and intimacy outside traditional frameworks. For some, it was genuinely liberating. People discovered parts of themselves they'd been taught to repress. They formed loving, unconventional families. They experienced joy and connection. But for many others, free love was a disaster. Because here's the thing, humans are wired for attachment. Jealousy isn't just a social construct, it's an emotion. And emotions don't disappear because you read a manifesto. When your partner sleeps with someone else, your brain doesn't care that everyone agreed this was cool. Your heart still breaks. It's like saying you're going to abolish traffic laws and just trust everyone to drive safely. Chaos ensues. Communes became hotbeds of romantic drama. Person A loves person B, who loves person C, who's secretly sleeping with person D, and meanwhile, person A is heartbroken and person E is trying to mediate. Friendships fractured, alliances shifted, group meetings devolved into emotional confrontations where people accused each other of not evolving or clinging to bourgeois notions of love. Some men used free love as an excuse to pressure women into sex. The rhetoric was slippery. If you're truly liberated, you'll say yes. If you say no, you're uptight, repressed, or still trapped by the system. Women who wanted boundaries were shamed. Consent became murky. And in the haze of drugs, alcohol, and communal living, lines were crossed. Pregnancy was another complication. Birth control wasn't always accessible or reliable. When someone got pregnant, the question of paternity was often unclear. Some communes embraced this ambiguity, raising children collectively without identifying fathers. Others found it destabilizing. Who was responsible? Who would provide? What if the mother wanted the father involved, but he didn't? STDs spread, though no one liked to talk about it. Antibiotics could treat most infections, but you had to admit you had one first, and that required medical care most communes avoided. So, people suffered silently or they spread infections unknowingly, creating a public health nightmare. And then there was emotional fallout. People who thought they were enlightened discovered they were just hurt. They left the commune or they stayed but withdrew, nursing wounds in silence. Free love required emotional maturity, self-awareness, communication skills, and mutual respect. Most people had none of those things. They had ideals and hormones. Some communes eventually developed more structure, relationship agreements, consent frameworks, boundaries. The successful ones realized that freedom without responsibility is just chaos. But by then the damage was done. Free love became a cautionary tale, an idea that sounded revolutionary but required more wisdom than most people possessed. Communes loved the idea of communal child rearing. Kids raised by the whole village, free to explore, unshackled by the nuclear family. Sounds idyllic, right? But in reality, it often meant kids wandering around unsupervised, eating dirt and learning life skills from whichever adult was least high at the moment. Some kids thrived in the chaos. Others just really wanted a stable bedtime and someone to remember their birthday. And children on communes were supposed to be the proof that a different world was possible. They'd grow up without the neurosis of capitalist society, without rigid gender roles or oppressive discipline. They'd be wild, free, creative, little humans unbound by convention. And in some cases that actually happened. Some commune kids had magical childhoods, running through forests, swimming in rivers, learning to garden and build and think critically. But for others, communal child rearing meant neglect dressed up as freedom. When everyone is responsible for the children, often no one is. Kids would wander off and no one would notice for hours. Meals were irregular. Bedtimes were non-existent. Education was sporadic at best. Some communes homeschooled cooperatively. Others just didn't. Kids grew up functionally illiterate. And not because they weren't smart, but because teaching requires time, attention, and structure. It's like assuming children will raise themselves if you just give them space. Commune kids often witness things children shouldn't see. Open drug use, adult nudity, sexual activity, intense emotional conflicts. The boundaries between adult life and childhood were porous or non-existent. Some kids adapted, developing resilience and independence. Others were traumatized, confused, and craving normalcy they couldn't articulate. Safety was another issue. Communes were full of hazards. Open fires, sharp tools, uneven terrain, wild animals. Kids got hurt. Burns, cuts, broken bones. Medical care was often delayed because communes distrusted doctors or lacked transportation. Some injuries that could have been minor became serious because no one intervened quickly enough. Socialization was strange. Commune kids grew up with a dozen aunts and uncles, but no clear parental figures. This could be beautiful, multiple adults offering love and guidance. But it could also be destabilizing. Who enforces rules? Who comforts you when you're scared? If your biological parent is off finding themselves, who's there for you? Some parents thrived in communal settings. They appreciated the support, the shared labor, the freedom from sole responsibility. Other parents felt their authority was undermined, their bond with their child diluted, their parenting choices questioned by the collective. Schooling was contentious. Some communes created their own schools teaching practical skills, critical thinking, and alternative histories. Others rejected formal education entirely, believing children would learn naturally through experience. This was true for some things. Kids learned to garden, build, forage, but they didn't learn to read, write, or do math unless someone taught them. When commune kids hit adolescence, things got complicated. Teenagers wanted identity, structure, and independence. Communes offered chaos. Many commune kids left as soon as they could, seeking the stability their parents had rejected. Others stayed, continuing the dream, or simply unable to imagine another way of life. Looking back, many adults who grew up on communes have complicated feelings. Some are grateful for the freedom, creativity, and close relationship with nature. Others are angry about the neglect, the lack of boundaries, the ways they were exposed to adult dysfunction. And some feel both because childhood on a commune could be paradise and trauma, sometimes simultaneously. Communes operated on the principle of shared labor. Everyone pitched in, cooking, cleaning, farming, building. But here's the problem. When everyone's responsible, no one's responsible. Some people work their butts off. Others perfected the art of looking busy while doing absolutely nothing. Resentment grew. Meetings were called. Nothing changed. Turns out utopia requires someone to do the dishes, and no one ever wanted to. Shared labor was supposed to be the great equalizer. No bosses, no workers, just equals contributing to the collective good. Everyone would rotate tasks, learn new skills, and share the burden. It sounded fair, democratic, and revolutionary. In practice, it was a logistical nightmare and a breeding ground for passive-aggressive conflict. The first problem was differing work ethics. Some people were naturally industrious. They'd wake up early, identify what needed doing, and do it. Others were less motivated. They'd sleep in, wander around, and claim they were processing or centering themselves while someone else milked the goats. The gap between contributors and free riders grew quickly. It's like a group project in school, except the grade is whether everyone eats tonight. Task assignment was contentious. Who decides who does what? Some communes used rotating schedules. Others held meetings where people volunteered. Still others just hoped work would get done spontaneously. None of these systems worked well. Rotating schedules meant nobody became skilled at anything. Yeah, you'd just start to figure out carpentry when it was time to switch to cooking. Volunteerism meant the same people did everything while others sat back. And spontaneous labor meant things didn't get done until they reached crisis level. Certain jobs were universally despised: cleaning the outhouse, doing laundry by hand, preparing meals for 30 people, weeding the garden in the hot sun. These tasks fell disproportionately on women despite all the rhetoric about equality. Men gravitated toward important jobs, building, planning, philosophizing, while women ended up doing the invisible, undervalued labor that kept everyone alive. Resentment festered. People who worked hard felt exploited. People who worked less felt judged. Meetings were called endless circular. His exhausting meetings where everyone aired grievances and no one proposed workable solutions. The most vocal people dominated, the quiet people withdrew, and the problems remained. Some communes tried to solve this with work credits or labor tracking. You'd log hours and earn credits toward shared resources. This worked in theory but required bureaucracy, record-keeping, and trust, things communes were supposed to transcend. It also introduced competition and comparison, which undermined the communal spirit. The most successful communes developed clear expectations, accountability structures, and consequences for not pulling weight. They acted less like utopian experiments and more like well-run cooperatives. But admitting you needed hierarchy and rules felt like admitting failure, so most communes limped along, perpetually understaffed and overworked, with a core group doing everything while others coasted. Physical work was also harder than anyone expected. Farming, building, hauling water. These aren't hobbies. They're grueling. People got injured, bad backs, repetitive strain, infections. Without proper tools or training, efficiency was low and suffering was high. A task that would take a professional an hour took communards a week. And when the work didn't get done, when the garden died, when the roof leaked, when there was no dinner, people blamed each other. Trust eroded. The collective began to fracture. Because shared labor only works when everyone shares. When they don't, it's just exploitation with extra steps. Communes claimed to be leaderless, but that was almost never true. Someone always took charge. Usually the person with the most charisma, the loudest voice, or the land deed. These unofficial leaders wielded power while pretending they didn't. And when things went wrong, they'd shrug and say, "We're all equals here," except some were more equal than others. The philosophy was beautiful. No hierarchies, no authority figures, just a collective of peers making decisions together. Leadership was seen as a relic of the oppressive system they'd escaped. Everyone would have an equal voice. Power would be distributed. Democracy would reign. In practice, this lasted about a week before someone emerged as the de facto leader. Sometimes it was the person who owned the land. Hard to be equals when one person can kick everyone else out. That person might claim they held the deed in trust for the collective, but when push came to shove, they had final say. Other times, leadership emerged through personality. Someone charismatic, articulate, and confident who others naturally deferred to. It's like saying your friend group has no leader, but everyone knows whose opinion actually matters. The problem wasn't that leaders emerged. The problem was the refusal to acknowledge it. Because communes operated on egalitarian ideology, admitting someone had more power was taboo. So leadership happened in the shadows. Decisions were presented as collective consensus when really one or two people had decided. Everything in advance and just managed the group discussion to rubber stamp their choice. This created a toxic dynamic. Official power structures can be challenged, reformed, or overthrown. Unofficial power structures are invisible and therefore unchallengeable. If you question the leader, you weren't critiquing authority. You were causing drama or not being supportive. The ideology of leaderlessness became a shield that protected leaders from accountability. Some leaders were benevolent. They worked hard, made fair decisions, and genuinely tried to serve the collective. They took on responsibility because someone had to, and they did it well. These communes functioned not because they lacked leadership, but because they had good leadership that operated with consent and transparency. Other leaders were tyrants. They used ideology to manipulate, silencing dissent by accusing questioners of being insufficiently evolved or still trapped in hierarchical thinking. They surrounded themselves with loyalists, created cliques, and punished anyone who challenged them, not with explicit authority. But with social exclusion, emotional manipulation, and gaslighting. The worst cases crossed into cult territory. Charismatic leaders convinced followers they were enlightened teachers, gurus, or prophets. Communes became personality cults where questioning the leader was spiritual failure. Members were isolated, controlled, and sometimes abused, all while maintaining the fiction of equality and freedom. Women and marginalized members suffered most. Even in leaderless structures, leadership usually fell to white men who spoke with confidence and authority. Women's voices were dismissed or ignored. People of color, if any, were present, were tokenized or pushed to the margins. The supposed egalitarianism just reproduced existing power structures with a hippie aesthetic. Some communes eventually acknowledged reality and created formal leadership structures. Elected coordinators, rotating facilitation, clear role definitions. These worked better because power was explicit, limited, and accountable. But getting there required admitting the original vision had failed, which many weren't willing to do. The irony is thick. Communes rejected hierarchy but created new ones. They rejected authority but empowered informal leaders with no checks or balances. They wanted equality but got power struggles dressed in tie-dye. The lesson: you can't abolish power by declaring it doesn't exist. You can only make it visible, accountable, and shared. Most communes never learned that lesson. Psychedelics were practically sacraments in commune culture. LSD, psilocybin, peyote. These weren't just drugs. They were tools for enlightenment, man. And sure, some people had profound spiritual experiences. Others just freaked out in a field and had to be talked down by someone equally high. Marijuana was everywhere constantly. If you wanted to have a clear-headed conversation, good luck. Drugs were central to the commune experience, woven into the fabric of daily life and spiritual practice. The counterculture had inherited a belief from figures like Timothy Leary and Aldous Huxley that psychedelics could unlock hidden dimensions of consciousness, dissolve the ego, and reveal universal truths. Communes took this seriously. Trips weren't recreational. They were sacred journeys, except when they weren't. Because while some people had beautiful, transformative experiences, seeing God in a flower, feeling one with the universe, resolving childhood trauma, others had terrifying bad trips. They'd spiral into paranoia, terror, or psychosis. And when you're in the middle of nowhere with no access to mental health care, that's a problem. It's like deciding to perform brain surgery on yourself because you read a book about it. LSD was the drug of choice, cheap, potent, and widely available. It promised to expand your mind and shatter societal conditioning. People took it at ceremonies, at work parties, sometimes just randomly on a Tuesday afternoon. Dosing was imprecise. You'd take a tab and hope it was good acid and not something cut with speed or strychnine. Quality control was not a priority. Mushrooms were considered more natural, more spiritual. Peyote, borrowed from Native American traditions, was treated as a sacred sacrament, kept though often without the cultural context or respect those traditions deserved. People would hold peyote ceremonies, vomiting and hallucinating, convinced they were connecting with ancient wisdom. Sometimes they were. Sometimes they just appropriated a ritual they didn't understand. Marijuana was ubiquitous. People smoked before breakfast, during work, after dinner, and before bed. Joints were passed in circles endlessly. Some people functioned fine. Others were perpetually foggy, unable to complete tasks or hold coherent conversations. The commune became a haze of smoke and forgotten responsibilities. Then there were the darker drugs. Speed showed up in some communes, especially those trying to sustain intense work schedules. Heroin crept in occasionally, devastating lives and fracturing communities. Communes that started with idealistic drug use sometimes devolved into addiction and dysfunction. The line between spiritual exploration and substance abuse blurred. Drug culture created hierarchies. Ironically, the person with the best connections, the purest acid, or the most spiritual trip reports gained status. Experienced trippers would guide newcomers, positioning themselves as shamans or teachers. Some were genuinely helpful, others were just drug dealers with a spiritual brand. Women faced unique pressures. Refusing drugs could mark you as uptight or unliberated. Accepting them could leave you vulnerable, drug-disoriented, and unable to consent. Sexual assault happened, often dismissed or minimized because everyone was high, and bad vibes were discouraged. Mental health suffered. Some people arrived at communes already fragile, seeking healing. Psychedelics could help with integration and support, but in chaotic environments with no professional guidance, they often made things worse. People had breakdowns, experienced lasting psychological damage, or developed substance dependencies. The mythology persisted, though, that drugs were keys to enlightenment rather than chemicals with unpredictable effects, that you could shortcut spiritual growth with a tab of acid, that being perpetually stoned was the same as being awakened. Some communes eventually restricted drug use or created guidelines. Others never did, and people paid the price. Wasted years, damaged brains, lost potential. Drugs promised transcendence. What they delivered was often just escape. Music was the lifeblood of commune culture. Guitars, bongos, flutes, harmonicas. If it made sound, someone played it. Jam sessions lasted for hours. Folk songs, protest anthems, improvised noise. Music brought people together, eased tension, and filled the silence. It was one of the few things that actually worked exactly as advertised. If there was one pure success on most communes, it was music. Commune life could be grinding, frustrating, and divisive. But when instruments came out, something shifted. Barriers dropped, egos softened. People connected through rhythm and melody in ways words couldn't achieve. Music was the glue that held fragile communities together. Guitars were everywhere. Someone always had an acoustic guitar, usually beaten up and out of tune, and they played it constantly. Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Joan Baez, their songs became commune anthems. People learned chords and lyrics by ear, passing songs around like shared stories. Original songs emerged too, simple and earnest about freedom, love, and the land. It's like having a permanent soundtrack to your life, except it's all performed live by people who may or may not know what they're doing. Percussion was democratic. You didn't need training to bang a drum or shake a tambourine. Bongos, congas, hand drums, rhythm sections formed spontaneously. Someone would start a beat, others would join, and suddenly there'd be a full percussion ensemble supporting whoever was singing or playing melody. These sessions could go on for hours, evolving from structured songs into improvised jams into pure rhythmic trance. Flutes, harmonicas, and other small instruments drifted through commune soundscapes. People played while working, while sitting by the fire. Music wasn't something you consumed, it was something you made together. There were no audiences and performers, just participants. Singing was communal too. Group vocals, harmonies, call and response. People sang while cooking, while gardening, while doing chores. Work songs made labor bearable, even joyful. Singing together created moments of unity that transcended the conflicts and frustrations of daily life. Some communes attracted serious musicians, people with training, talent, and ambition. They taught others, led workshops, organized concerts. A few communes became regional music scenes, hosting festivals or attracting touring performers. Music gave communes cultural capital and connected them to the broader counterculture movement. But music was also accessible to beginners. You didn't have to be good. Enthusiasm mattered more than skill. People who had never played an instrument picked up guitars and learned. Children grew up surrounded by music, absorbing it naturally. For many, commune life was their musical education. There was a spiritual dimension too. Music was prayer, meditation, catharsis, chanting, toning, and improvised vocal explorations were used in ceremonies and rituals. Music helped people process emotions, release tension, and connect with something transcendent. Whether they called it God, the universe, or just the collective energy of the group, not everyone loved it. Some people found the constant music overwhelming. They craved quiet, solitude, and silence that never came. The guitar player who insisted on performing every night became a running joke. The bongo player who couldn't keep time became a source of irritation. But mostly music was welcomed. Decades later, when people look back on commune life, music is what they remember fondly. The songs, the jam sessions, the feeling of voices raised together. Music didn't solve practical problems, but it made the struggle feel meaningful. It created beauty in the midst of chaos. And in a world of failed experiments and broken dreams, that was something real. Communes were spiritual melting pots. You had Buddhists, Hindus, pagans, Jesus freaks, Hare Krishna, and people who just worshipped the universe. Morning chants, meditation circles, sweat lodges, tarot readings. It was all happening often simultaneously. Some found genuine meaning, others just enjoyed the ritual, and a few were just really into incense. And spirituality on communes was eclectic, syncretic, and deeply personal. Most communards rejected the organized religions of their childhoods, Christianity, Judaism, and were searching for something else, something more authentic, more experiential, more connected to nature and the cosmos. What they found was a buffet of borrowed traditions, often mixed together without much concern for cultural context or consistency. Buddhism was popular, especially Zen. People meditated, built zendos, and quoted koans they only half understood. The emphasis on mindfulness, simplicity, and non-attachment fit perfectly with commune ideals. Some studied seriously, reading texts and practicing under guidance. Others just liked sitting cross-legged and calling it enlightenment. It's like creating your own religion from a Wikipedia deep dive in a dream you once had. Hinduism contributed yoga, mantras, and devotional practices. Krishna consciousness attracted some communes entirely. Hare Krishna communities were technically communes themselves with their chanting, vegetarianism, and vibrant aesthetic. Yoga was practiced enthusiastically, though often divorced from its philosophical and spiritual roots. Downward dog became a morning routine, not a spiritual practice. Native American spirituality was heavily appropriated. Sweat lodges, vision quests, sage smudging, medicine wheels, all borrowed, often without permission or understanding. Well-meaning communards believed they were honoring indigenous wisdom, but they were really just taking what appealed to them and ignoring the cultural theft. And some native activists criticized this appropriation, but the criticism rarely penetrated the commune bubble. Paganism and earth-based spirituality flourished. Goddess worship, seasonal celebrations, rituals honoring nature. These traditions felt authentic to people seeking connection with the land. Solstices and equinoxes became major celebrations with bonfires, drumming, and dancing. Tarot, astrology, and divination were taken seriously. Your birth chart could determine your role in the community. Jesus freaks, Christian communards formed their own communities or existed as minorities in secular communes. They read the Bible literally, lived communally like early Christians, and believed Jesus was returning soon. They were often stricter, more organized, and less drug-friendly than their hippie neighbors. But they shared the same rejection of mainstream society. Some communes blended everything into personalized spiritualities. You might meditate in the morning, do yoga at noon, attend a Christian service in the evening, and end the night with a pagan ritual. This felt inclusive and open-minded. Critics called it shallow, a spiritual supermarket where people consumed traditions like products. Ceremonies were central. Full moon gatherings, seasonal rites, births, deaths, hand fastings, pagan weddings. These rituals created meaning, marked time, and bound communities together. Even people who weren't particularly spiritual participated because ritual provided structure and connection. But spirituality could also be divisive. Different beliefs clashed. The vegans versus the meat-eaters, the Christians versus the pagans, and the serious practitioners versus the casual dabblers. Spiritual hierarchy emerged. Gurus, teachers, enlightened members who claimed special insight. Sometimes this was benign. Other times it enabled manipulation and abuse. The lasting impact was a new religious landscape in America. Communes helped popularize yoga, meditation, and alternative spiritualities that are now mainstream. They also normalized religious eclecticism and personal spiritual authority. The idea that you can create your own path rather than following tradition. Whether that's progress or just consumerism wearing robes depends on your perspective. Communes promised gender equality, but often delivered the same old story. Women cooked, cleaned, and cared for kids, while men built, led, and philosophized. Sure, everyone talked about liberation, but someone still had to wash the dishes, and that someone was usually a woman. Feminism existed on communes, but it had to fight for space just like everywhere else. The counterculture claimed to have transcended sexism. Communes were supposed to be egalitarian spaces where gender didn't determine your role. Women were liberated sexually, socially, politically. They could be leaders, builders, thinkers. The old patriarchal rules didn't apply, except they did, just with different packaging. In practice, commune life reproduced traditional gender divisions. Women found themselves doing the invisible labor that sustained everyone. Cooking, cleaning, childcare, laundry, tending the sick. These tasks were essential but undervalued. Meanwhile, men took on visible, prestigious work, building structures, making decisions, leading meetings, and representing the commune to outsiders. It's like rebranding housework as Earth Mother energy and expecting women to be grateful. When women pointed this out, they were told they were clinging to bourgeois feminism or creating unnecessary conflict. The men insisted everyone was free to do whatever work they wanted. Women just naturally gravitated toward nurturing roles. This ignored socialization, expectation, and the subtle pressure women felt to maintain harmony by doing unpleasant jobs no one else would do. Free love compounded the problem. Sexual liberation often meant women were expected to be sexually available without being possessive or jealous. Saying no marked you as uptight. Setting boundaries was bringing your hang-ups into the space. Some men weaponized liberation rhetoric to coerce women, framing consent as a political act rather than a personal choice. Pregnancy and childcare fell almost entirely on women. Men might talk about communal child rearing, but when babies needed feeding at 3 a.m., it was mothers who woke up. When toddlers needed supervision, women did it. Men participated when it was fun, playing, teaching, but disappeared when it was tedious or difficult. Some women pushed back. They formed women's circles, consciousness-raising groups, and explicitly feminist communes. They read Shulamith Firestone, Kate Millett, and Gloria Steinem. They demanded equal participation in decision-making and physical labor. They refused to be relegated to support roles. This created tension. Men who considered themselves enlightened were confronted with their own sexism. Some listened, reflected, and changed. Others became defensive, accusing women of destroying communal harmony or importing outside ideologies. Communes split over feminist demands. Women-only communes emerged as a response, spaces where women could live, work, and build without male presence. These communities faced different challenges. Lack of physical strength for heavy labor, exclusion from male-dominated networks, hostility from neighboring mixed communes, but they also created genuine sisterhood and freedom from male authority. Queer women found complicated space on communes. Lesbian relationships were more accepted than in mainstream society, but bisexual women faced suspicion from both straight and lesbian members. The sexual fluidity encouraged by free love could be liberating it, but it could also erase lesbian identity under the guise of everyone being potentially attracted to everyone. Violence against women happened too, though it's rarely discussed in nostalgic accounts. Domestic abuse, sexual assault, rape. Communes' rejection of law enforcement meant these crimes often went unreported. Community justice was inconsistent. Sometimes perpetrators were expelled. Sometimes victims were blamed. Sometimes nothing happened and everyone just pretended it hadn't occurred. The myth of liberated commune life clashed with reality. Women gained some freedoms but lost others. They escaped traditional marriage but often ended up doing traditional women's work without even the legal protections marriage provided. They experienced sexual freedom but also sexual pressure. They joined collectives but often remained subordinate. And feminism didn't destroy communes, but it revealed their contradictions. You couldn't build utopia on the backs of women's unpaid labor. You couldn't claim equality while maintaining hierarchy. Some communes learned this and evolved. Others collapsed under the weight of their own hypocrisy. Turns out putting a bunch of strangers together and asking them to share everything doesn't always go smoothly. Conflicts erupted over chores, money, lovers, beliefs, and whether the goat should be named Gerald or Susan. Some disputes were resolved through talking circles. Others ended in shouting matches, walkouts, or someone packing their van and leaving in the middle of the night. Communes were idealistic experiments, but they were populated by real humans with egos, traumas, preferences, and limits. Conflict was inevitable. The question was how communities handled it, and most handled it poorly. The first fights were always about work, who's doing their share and who's slacking. These arguments started small but festered. Someone would notice that Mark never helped with dishes. Then someone else would point out that Sarah always disappeared during heavy labor. Resentments accumulated until someone exploded at a community meeting. And suddenly, everyone was yelling about months of suppressed frustration. It's like a family road trip, except it never ends and you can't go back to separate houses. Romantic conflicts were inevitable. When person A breaks up with person B and immediately starts dating person C, and all three still live in the same yurt, tensions arise. Jealousy, heartbreak, awkwardness. These don't disappear just because you believe in free love. Add drugs and poor communication skills and you've got a recipe for drama that makes reality TV look tame. Ideological disputes fractured communities. Vegetarians versus meat-eaters became surprisingly heated. Should we allow alcohol? Should we homeschool or use public schools? Should we engage with capitalism or reject it entirely? These weren't abstract debates. They determined daily life. And when consensus decision-making meant everyone had veto power, even small disagreements could paralyze the community. Personality clashes were magnified by close quarters. That person who talks too much, you can't escape them. The one who plays guitar at midnight, they're 3 feet from your sleeping bag. The passive-aggressive martyr who sighs loudly while doing dishes. You see them all day, every day. The normal social friction that would be manageable in regular life became intolerable. Money always caused fights. Some members had outside income, others didn't. Should everyone contribute equally regardless of means? Should those with more pay more? What about inherited wealth, trust fund kids versus working class members? These economic inequalities created resentment and guilt in equal measure. Parenting conflicts emerged when children were involved. Some parents wanted structure and boundaries. Others believed in total freedom. When your parenting philosophy conflicts with your neighbors and your kids all play together, it's a problem. Especially when someone else's undisciplined child breaks your stuff or teaches your kid to steal. Some communes developed conflict resolution processes, talking circles, mediation, facilitated meetings. These worked when people were genuinely committed to resolution. But often people just wanted to vent or be validated. Meetings became therapy sessions where everyone processed feelings, but nothing got solved. The worst conflicts involved leaders or unofficial power holders. When the person who owns the land makes a unilateral decision, or when the charismatic guru overrules consensus, what do? You can't vote them out. You can't appeal to a higher authority. Your options are comply, fight, or leave. Most people left. Violence was rare but not unheard of. Fistfights erupted over serious betrayals, theft, infidelity, sabotage. Physical intimidation was more common. Large, angry men used their presence to silence critics. Women who challenged authority faced sexual harassment or assault as punishment. The communes that survived learned to embrace conflict rather than suppress it. They developed clear processes, fair rules, and accountability. They accepted that disagreement was normal and created channels to address it. The ones that collapsed tried to maintain the fiction of perfect harmony even as everything burned down around them. Utopia requires perfection. Human communities require compromise. Communes that figured this out survived. The rest became cautionary tales. Modern medicine, that was for conformists. Communes embraced natural healing, herbal remedies, homeopathy, energy work, and the occasional shaman. Sometimes it worked. Chamomile tea really does help you sleep. Other times, people suffered needlessly from treatable conditions because no one trusted doctors. And when someone got really sick, they'd quietly sneak off to the hospital. Healthcare on communes was a mix of folk wisdom, wishful thinking, and genuine alternative practices. The rejection of mainstream medicine was partly ideological. Distrust of pharmaceutical companies, doctors, and institutions, and partly practical. Medical care was expensive, and most communards had no health insurance. So they turned to what was available: plants, prayer, and hope. Herbal medicine was taken seriously. People grew medicinal gardens: chamomile, echinacea, comfrey, calendula, yarrow. They made tinctures, salves, and teas. Some of this worked. Willow bark contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. Ginger settles stomachs. Peppermint helps digestion. For minor ailments, herbal remedies were often effective. It's like trying to treat appendicitis with positive thinking and a nice cup of tea. But herbs can't treat everything. When someone developed a serious infection, broke a bone, or showed symptoms of a chronic disease, herbs were inadequate. Yet, many communards avoided doctors out of principle or fear. They'd try increasingly desperate remedies while conditions worsened. By the time they finally sought medical help, simple problems had become emergencies. Childbirth was particularly risky. Home birth was common, attended by midwives or just experienced women from the community. When births went normally, this worked beautifully, natural, empowering, intimate. But when complications arose, breech presentations, hemorrhaging, fetal distress, the lack of medical intervention could be fatal. Some babies died, some mothers died. Then these tragedies were absorbed as the cost of living naturally. Homeopathy was popular despite being scientifically baseless. People swallowed sugar pills believing they contained healing energy. The placebo effect meant some felt better, reinforcing the practice. Others got worse but blamed themselves for not believing hard enough. Energy healing, Reiki, laying on of hands, chakra balancing was practiced enthusiastically. Practitioners would channel universal energy to heal illness. Did it work? Sometimes people felt calmer, which helped. Sometimes they felt nothing, and sometimes they delayed real treatment while their condition deteriorated. Mental health was especially neglected. Depression, anxiety, trauma, psychosis. These were interpreted spiritually rather than medically. Yes, someone experiencing a mental health crisis was having a spiritual emergency or dark night of the soul. Psychedelics were sometimes used therapeutically, which could help in controlled settings, but was often disastrous in chaotic commune environments. Dental care was almost non-existent. Toothaches were endured or self-treated with clove oil. Cavities went untreated until teeth rotted. By their 30s, many communards had significant dental problems. But dentists were expensive, and visiting one felt like admitting defeat. Nutrition-related illnesses were common. Scurvy from lack of vitamin C, anemia from protein deficiency, rickets in children who didn't get enough sunlight or vitamin D. These Victorian-era diseases returned because people didn't understand nutrition despite thinking they were eating healthily. Some communes eventually established relationships with sympathetic doctors or free clinics. These medical professionals respected alternative approaches but provided real care when needed. Having this safety net made a huge difference in community health and survival. The irony is that many communards were fleeing alienating, impersonal medical systems. Their critique wasn't entirely wrong. Western medicine can be overly medicalized, profit-driven, and dismissive of patients. But rejecting it entirely left people vulnerable. The middle ground, integrating alternative and conventional medicine, was hard to find. People died unnecessarily on communes. From infections, childbirth complications, untreated chronic conditions, and accidents where medical intervention could have helped. These deaths were tragic and largely preventable. But the ideology of natural living made them almost inevitable. Personal hygiene on a commune was flexible. Deodorant was a corporate scam. Shaving was a patriarchal expectation. Bathing happened when convenient, which wasn't often. People smelled like campfire, patchouli, and honest labor. To outsiders, it was overwhelming. To insiders, it was authentic. To everyone, it was pungent. Hygiene became a political statement. Mainstream America was obsessed with cleanliness, daily showers, deodorants, perfumes, grooming products. To the counterculture, this was artificial, wasteful, and rooted in corporate manipulation. Natural body odor was honest. Why mask your pheromones? Why alter your natural state to please consumerist beauty standards? This philosophy sounded great until you were living with 30 people who hadn't bathed in a week. Then it was a sensory assault. It's like deciding that brushing your teeth is conformist and then wondering why your mouth tastes like a garbage fire. Bathing facilities were minimal. Rivers, lakes, and streams were the primary option. In summer, this was refreshing. In winter, it was torture. Some communes built outdoor showers, barrels of sun-warmed water with gravity-fed nozzles. These provided lukewarm water for maybe 2 minutes, barely enough to rinse soap off. Heating water for baths required firewood, time, and effort. Luxuries in short supply, so people just didn't bathe much. Once a week if they were diligent, once a month if they weren't. Hair became matted and greasy. Skin accumulated layers of dirt, sweat, and wood smoke. Clothes rarely washed became stiff with grime. This smell was distinctive, a combination of unwashed bodies, campfire, patchouli oil, used to mask the stench, and whatever they'd been working with, goats, compost, soil. Body hair grew freely. Men stopped shaving. Women stopped shaving legs and armpits. This was liberation from grooming standards imposed by patriarchy and advertising. For many women, it was genuinely freeing. For others, it was uncomfortable but expected. Not shaving marked you as enlightened. Shaving marked you as still trapped by societal conditioning. Dental hygiene suffered. Toothbrushes and toothpaste were sometimes available, but inconsistently used. Without regular brushing, teeth yellowed and decayed. Gum disease was common. Bad breath was universal. Kissing someone from a commune was an act of bravery or desperation. Menstruation added complexity for women. Without running water, dealing with periods was challenging. Some used reusable cloth pads, washing them by hand. A messy, labor-intensive process. Others used disposable pads when they could afford them. Though these were seen as environmentally problematic, menstrual hygiene was just harder without plumbing, hot water, and privacy. Lice, scabies spread easily. Close quarters, shared bedding, and infrequent washing created ideal conditions for parasites. Everyone had lice at some point. Scratching was constant. Treatments were home remedies. Vinegar rinses, mayonnaise, tea tree oil. They worked imperfectly. By the time one person cleared their infestation, they'd been reinfected by someone else. The smell became normalized. After a few weeks, you stopped noticing your own stench or your neighbors'. Your nose adapted. But when someone left the commune and returned to mainstream society, they were shocked by how clean and artificially scented everything was. And mainstream people could smell communards coming from 20 feet away. Visitors were often repulsed. Friends and family who came to see their commune-dwelling loved ones would try to hide their reactions. The combination of body odor, wood smoke, and animal smells was overwhelming. Some relationships ended because relatives couldn't handle the smell. Children raised on communes often had complicated feelings about hygiene. Some embraced it as normal. Others felt embarrassed, especially when they interacted with kids from town who'd comment on their smell or dirty clothes. Some commune kids grew up to be hygiene-obsessed adults, overcompensating for their childhood. Eventually, some communes built better facilities, proper showers, laundry systems. As communities matured and stabilized, hygiene improved. But in the early days, when idealism ran high and resources ran low, cleanliness was sacrificed on the altar of authenticity, and everyone smelled like it. Communes didn't exist in a vacuum. Locals were often suspicious, these weirdos with their long hair and strange music. Some neighbors were friendly, others hostile. Cops occasionally raided looking for drugs. Tourists sometimes showed up, gawking like it was a zoo. Communes were countercultural islands in a sea of straight society, and the tension was always there. The relationship between communes and surrounding communities was complicated. Rural areas where communes settled were usually conservative, religious, traditional, wary of outsiders. Then suddenly, a bunch of long-haired, unwashed city kids showed up talking about free love and revolution. It didn't go over well. Some locals were curious and friendly. They'd offer advice on farming, sell supplies, or just coexist peacefully. A few even admired what the communes were trying to do: self-sufficiency, hard work. Community values resonated with rural ideals. But most were hostile or at minimum deeply suspicious. It's like moving into a neighborhood and immediately announcing you reject everything your neighbors believe in. Communards represented everything rural conservatives feared: drugs, promiscuity, atheism, communism, rejection of family values. They were moral threats, corrupting influences on local youth. Parents worried their children would run off and join, and preachers delivered sermons warning against the hippie menace. Town councils debated how to drive them out. Harassment was common. Locals would drive past communes shouting insults or throwing things. Teenagers would vandalize property, knocking down mailboxes, shooting at signs, setting fires. Some communes faced organized intimidation campaigns designed to make them leave. The message was clear: you're not welcome here. Law enforcement scrutinized communes intensely. Any excuse for a raid. Noise complaints, trespassing reports, suspicions of drug use brought police. Officers would search aggressively, looking for marijuana, LSD, anything that could justify arrests. Some raids were legitimate law enforcement. Others felt like harassment targeting lifestyle rather than crime. Drug busts were frequent. Communes often had marijuana growing openly. Someone would report it. Cops would raid and people would be arrested. Legal battles followed. Expensive, time-consuming, community-destroying. Some communes were shut down entirely by legal pressure. Zoning laws and building codes became weapons. Officials would cite communes for unpermitted structures, sanitation violations, or illegal occupancy. Technically, they were often right. Communes built without permits and violated health codes. But enforcement was selective and motivated by hostility more than public safety. Tourists presented a different problem. Word would spread about a nearby commune, and curious outsiders would show up to gawk. They'd drive in uninvited, take photos, ask invasive questions. Some were genuinely interested, others treated it like visiting a human zoo. As I see the way, it was intrusive and disrespectful of privacy. Some communes tried to engage constructively with neighbors. They'd sell produce at farmers' markets, volunteer in town, attend local events. Building relationships helped once people knew you personally. It was harder to demonize you. Communes that integrated into local economies and social networks faced less hostility. Others remained isolated and insular, which fed suspicion. When you hide behind gates and refuse to interact, people assume the worst. Rumors spread about orgies, devil worship, child abuse. Most were false, but some had kernels of truth, and when actual problems occurred, domestic violence, drug overdoses, fires, it confirmed every negative stereotype. The media didn't help. Journalists would visit, write sensational articles emphasizing the exotic and scandalous. Headlines focused on nudity and drug use, not sustainable agriculture or intentional community. These articles attracted more unwanted attention and reinforced negative perceptions. The clash between countercultural ideals and rural reality was profound. Communes imagined themselves as escaping society, but society surrounded them. You couldn't truly opt out. You still relied on outside systems, buying supplies in town, accessing medical care, dealing with government bureaucracy. The isolation was partial and incomplete. Some communes relocated to more tolerant areas, college towns, liberal regions where they faced less hostility. Others dug in and endured, accepting that tension with neighbors was the price of their lifestyle. A few collapsed under external pressure, their members scattering when legal problems or community hostility became overwhelming. The outside world never went away. It was always there, watching, judging, and occasionally intervening. Utopia has borders, and beyond them, reality waited. Most commune members arrived with zero practical skills. They learned to farm by killing plants. They learned to build by constructing structures that collapsed. They learned to preserve food by watching it rot. Trial and error was the teaching method, and error won most of the time. But slowly, painfully, some people actually figured it out. The commune movement was filled with people who'd spent their lives in cities and suburbs. They could write essays, pass exams, and navigate bureaucracies. But they couldn't grow food, build shelter, or fix a broken water pump. These skills weren't taught in college. They weren't valued in middle-class families. So communards had to learn from scratch, and learning was brutal. Farming seemed simple in theory. Put seeds in ground, add water, harvest vegetables. In practice, it's complex and unforgiving. You need to understand soil composition, climate zones, growing seasons, pest management, crop rotation. Plant tomatoes too early, they'll freeze. Plant too late, they won't mature. Water too much, root rot too little, they'll die. It's like trying to learn surgery by just cutting people open and hoping for the best. The first gardens were disasters, seeds planted at wrong depths or wrong times. No understanding of spacing, plants crowded together competing for resources. No pest control. Insects and animals ate everything. No weeding, and crops choked out by aggressive native plants. Harvest was pathetic. A few stunted vegetables that barely fed anyone. People persisted. They consulted books, the Whole Earth Catalogue, organic farming guides, old agricultural manuals. Some sought advice from neighboring farmers, swallowing their pride to ask for help. Slowly, through repeated failure, they learned. By the third or fourth season, some communes produced actual yields. Building was similarly trial and error. Structures were designed with enthusiasm, but little knowledge of engineering, materials, or local building codes, which they ignored anyway. Walls weren't square. Roofs leaked, floors sagged, doors didn't fit their frames. Some buildings collapsed under their own weight or during the first heavy storm. Injuries were common. Smashed fingers, cut hands, falls from ladders. Without proper tools or safety equipment, construction was dangerous. Some people got good at it, developing real carpentry skills. Others just muddled through, creating structures that worked barely, but worked enough. Food preservation was critical. You can't eat a year's worth of vegetables in August. You need to can, dry, pickle, or store them. But preservation requires specific techniques. Canning requires proper sterilization, or you risk botulism. Drying requires the right conditions or food molds. Root cellaring requires correct temperature and humidity. Early preservation efforts failed spectacularly. Jars of canned goods exploded. Dried food rotted. Stored vegetables turned to mush. People got sick from improperly preserved food. But they learned often from older rural neighbors who'd been preserving food their whole lives. Eventually, communes developed decent preservation systems. Tool maintenance was overlooked initially. Axes became dull, saws rusted. Equipment broke and nobody knew how to fix it. Repairs required skills. Metalwork, carpentry, mechanical knowledge. Some people developed these skills, becoming community experts. Others just kept breaking things. The learning curve took years. Most people arrived expecting immediate success, a functional farm by the first harvest, a warm home by winter. Reality was much slower. It took 3 to 5 years to develop basic competency, longer to thrive. Many people gave up before reaching that point, defeated by the difficulty. Those who stayed developed genuine expertise. They became skilled farmers, builders, and craftspeople. And some were more competent than lifelong rural residents because they had learned intentionally, studying and experimenting rather than just repeating traditional methods. This knowledge became their greatest legacy, practical skills passed to the next generation or taken into new projects. The hard truth. Back to the land living requires skills that take years to develop. Ideology and enthusiasm aren't enough. You need knowledge, experience, and the humility to accept that you'll fail repeatedly before you succeed. Some communes learned this, others never did, and collapsed in the learning phase. Summer on a commune magical, winter brutal. Suddenly the lack of insulation mattered. The broken heater mattered. The fact that no one chopped enough firewood mattered. People huddled together for warmth, burned through resources, and reconsidered their life choices. Winter was the great filter. The ones who stayed were truly committed or truly stuck. Winter revealed every flaw in commune infrastructure. That charming yurt with canvas walls. It's basically a tent when snow starts falling. The geodesic dome with gaps between panels. Welcome to living inside a colander. The lack of insulation, the drafty windows, the doors that don't quite seal. All summer long, these were minor inconveniences. In winter, they became survival issues. Heating was the central challenge. Wood stoves were the primary heat source, which meant someone had to cut, split, haul, and stack firewood, tons of it. A single wood stove might need 4 to 6 cords of wood to heat through winter. That's hundreds of hours of labor with axes and saws. And if you didn't prepare in summer and fall, you were screwed. It's like discovering you need a jacket only after you're already standing naked in a blizzard. Communes that hadn't stockpiled firewood faced desperate midwinter logging expeditions, cutting frozen wood with dull tools, hauling it through snow, trying to burn green wood that wouldn't catch fire properly, and filled buildings with smoke. People froze. Fingers went numb, toes turned black with frostbite. The romantic notion of living simply became a fight against hypothermia. Even with adequate firewood, heating was inadequate. Wood stoves heated unevenly, blazing hot near the stove, freezing everywhere else. You'd roast on one side while your back stayed cold. Overnight, fires died down and morning temperatures inside were barely above freezing. People slept in all their clothes piled under every blanket they owned and still woke up shivering. Water systems froze, pipes burst, wells iced over. Suddenly, getting water meant breaking ice, melting snow, or hauling buckets from a stream that hadn't completely frozen. Washing anything became nearly impossible. Bathing, forget it. You went months without a proper wash because heating enough water was too resource-intensive. Food supplies dwindled. Gardens were dead. Stored vegetables rotted or froze. Preserved food ran low if you hadn't canned enough. Hunting and foraging were options, but most communards lacked the skills. The diet narrowed to whatever staples remained. Rice, beans, flour, if you were lucky. Malnutrition set in. People got weak, sick, depressed. Winter also brought isolation. Roads became impassable. Vehicles wouldn't start or got stuck in mud and snow. Trips to town for supplies became epic journeys. Communication with the outside world dropped to nothing. You were trapped with the same people in the same cold buildings with nothing to do but survive until spring. The psychological toll was immense. Seasonal affective disorder hit hard. Long dark days, constant cold, no sunlight. Depression became epidemic. Cabin fever meant people who'd been tolerating each other suddenly couldn't stand to be in the same room. Arguments escalated. Relationships collapsed. Some people had full breakdowns, staring into fires and barely speaking. Children suffered, especially cold, hungry, bored, and scared. Parents tried to maintain routines and morale, but it was hard when they were barely surviving themselves. Some families left midwinter, yes, packing everything into vehicles and driving through snow to anywhere warmer and more stable. The communes that survived winter were those that prepared. They chopped wood all summer. They insulated buildings properly. They preserved enough food. They planned activities to maintain morale, storytelling, music, projects. They took winter seriously as a life-threatening challenge rather than just another season. But many didn't prepare. They assumed good vibes and collective spirit would carry them through. They learned the hard way that nature doesn't care about your ideology. When February arrived and the firewood was gone and the food was running low and everyone was sick and freezing, ideology didn't keep you warm. Spring was a resurrection. When the snow melted and green returned and warmth came back, it felt miraculous. Survivors emerged thinner, tougher, and often traumatized. Some stayed determined to prepare better for the next winter. Others packed their bags the moment the roads cleared, swearing they'd never be that cold or hungry again. Winter didn't kill the commune movement, but it killed a lot of individual communes. And it taught everyone who stayed that utopia requires not just ideals, but firewood. Lots and lots of firewood. Not everyone stayed. Some left after a week. Others lasted months or years before realizing this wasn't working. Departures were sometimes quiet, sometimes explosive. People left for jobs, for school, for sanity, for love. And those who remained often felt betrayed, like the leavers had abandoned the cause. But maybe they just wanted a hot shower. Leaving a commune was complicated. It wasn't just quitting a job or moving to a new apartment. You were abandoning a belief system, admitting that the dream hadn't worked for you at least. That carried shame. You'd told your family this was the answer. You'd committed yourself to the collective. Walking away felt like failure. Some people left within days. They'd arrive full of excitement, take one look at the reality, the dirt, the lack of privacy, the cold outhouse, and realize they'd made a terrible mistake. These early departures were embarrassing but clean. You hadn't invested much. You could leave without too much drama. It's like realizing on the first day of a new job that you've made a horrible career decision, except your coworkers also think you're morally deficient for leaving. Others lasted weeks or months. They tried to make it work, ignoring the red flags, telling themselves it would get better. But eventually the breaking point arrived. Maybe it was a fight with another member. Maybe it was getting sick and realizing there was no real medical care. Maybe it was just accumulating misery, the hunger, the cold, the lack of basic comforts until they couldn't take another day. Romantic relationships often triggered departures. Someone would fall in love with a person outside the commune or fall out of love with their commune partner. You'd have to choose the relationship or the community. Most chose the relationship. Love beat ideology. Children were another departure catalyst. Parents who had been fine with hardship for themselves couldn't watch their kids suffer. When your child was sick, hungry, or falling behind developmentally, the abstract ideals of communal living stopped mattering. You left for your kid, even if you felt guilty about it. Some left for practical reasons. They needed medical care the commune couldn't provide. They needed income the commune couldn't generate. They wanted education or career opportunities. These departures were rational, but still felt like betrayal to those who stayed. You were choosing the system over the revolution. The most painful departures were ideological. Someone would become disillusioned, realizing the commune wasn't actually egalitarian, or that free love was hurting people, or that the whole project was built on fantasy. They'd speak up, try to change things, and when nothing changed, they'd leave. These departures were often bitter with accusations and recriminations on both sides. Leaving logistics were complicated. What about property you'd contributed? What about labor you'd invested? What about relationships you'd built? Some communes had clear agreements about departure. You could take what you brought, but nothing more. Others had no systems, leading to disputes about who owned what. The act of leaving was often furtive. People would pack in secret and leave at dawn, avoiding confrontation. They'd drive away while everyone slept, leaving maybe a note, maybe nothing. This felt cowardly, but was emotionally safer than facing the community's disappointment and anger. Those who stayed felt abandoned. Each departure reinforced doubts about whether the project would work. If so many people were leaving, what did that say about the commune? Steyers often developed contempt for leavers. They weren't tough enough, weren't committed enough, weren't spiritually evolved enough, and yet this contempt masked fear that maybe the leavers were right. Some people left and returned, sometimes multiple times. They'd try mainstream life, realize it wasn't for them either, and come back. Or they'd leave one commune and join another, convinced this time would be different. The commune circuit developed, people moving between communities, carrying stories and skills, but also disillusionment. Years later, many leavers felt ambivalent. They didn't regret trying. The experience taught them things about themselves, about community, about what they valued. But they also didn't regret leaving. The commune had been a chapter, an experiment, not a permanent identity. The hardest part for many was explaining their departure to outsiders. Family members who had been skeptical felt vindicated. I told you so. Friends from their old life welcomed them back but couldn't understand what they'd been through. And new people they met dismissed the commune years as a youthful mistake. A weird detour that didn't count, but it counted. The commune changed you. Even if you left, you carried it forward. The skills learned, the relationships formed, the ideals tested. Leaving wasn't giving up. It was just recognizing that this particular version of utopia wasn't yours, and maybe that was okay. A few communes actually made it. They built sustainable systems, resolved conflicts, attracted skilled members, and adapted when needed. Some are still around today, transformed but alive. These weren't the chaotic crash pads. They were intentional communities with structure, purpose, and a willingness to evolve. They proved it could work. If you were willing to do the work, the successful communes didn't succeed by accident. They succeeded because they learned from failures and adapted. They started with idealism but pragmatically adjusted when reality hit. They built systems, established accountability, and accepted that some structure was necessary for community to function. Twin Oaks in Virginia, founded in 1967, is one of the most famous success stories. Based on B.F. Skinner's behaviorist principles, it developed a labor credit system where all work was valued equally. You earned credits for labor, cooking, farming, childcare, administration, and everyone had to contribute a certain number of hours weekly. This prevented free riding and resentment. It's like actually reading the instruction manual instead of just winging it and hoping for the best. Twin Oaks also established clear membership processes. You couldn't just show up and join. There was a visitor period, then a provisional membership, then full membership. This filtering ensured people were genuinely committed and compatible. They could ask people to leave if they weren't working out, which sounds harsh, but prevented toxic members from destroying the community. The farm in Tennessee, founded by Stephen Gaskin in 1971, took a different approach. It was spiritually based but highly organized. Gaskin was an acknowledged leader, not pretending to be equal, but openly guiding the community. This clarity prevented the hidden power dynamics that destroyed other communes. The farm also engaged with the outside world, running businesses, providing services, and eventually becoming economically sustainable. East Wind Community in Missouri, another successful commune, focused on economic viability from the start. They manufactured products, rope, hammocks, nut butters, and sold them commercially. This generated reliable income, allowing them to support members and invest in infrastructure. Economic security reduced stress and conflict, giving the community stability. Successful communes also handled conflict better. They developed mediation processes, clear communication guidelines, and ways to address problems before they exploded. They didn't pretend conflict didn't exist or that everyone knew would naturally get along. They treated conflict resolution as a skill to be learned and practiced. Many successful communes eventually loosened ideological purity. They allowed private property within communal frameworks. They permitted members to have outside jobs and income. They built private living spaces while maintaining communal areas. This hybrid model gave people autonomy and privacy while preserving collective benefits. Education became a priority in lasting communes. Children received real schooling either through homeschool cooperatives or local public schools. Adults taught skills to each other systematically. Knowledge was valued and transmitted, creating competency across the community. Successful communes also engaged strategically with the outside world. They didn't isolate themselves in hostile opposition to mainstream society. They built relationships with neighbors, complied with essential regulations, and participated in local economies. This reduced conflict and increased stability. Demographics mattered too. Successful communes attracted people with useful skills: farmers, builders, teachers, medical professionals. They also maintained age diversity. Communities with only young people lacked wisdom and experience. Those with older members benefited from their practical knowledge and emotional maturity. Financial management was critical. Successful communes tracked income and expenses, maintained reserves, and planned for the future. They didn't just hope things would work out. They budgeted, saved, and invested in infrastructure and equipment. Perhaps most importantly, successful communes accepted evolution. They didn't cling rigidly to founding principles when those principles weren't working. They adapted, experimented, and changed. Some transitioned from pure communes to co-housing communities. Others incorporated as cooperatives or non-profits. The form changed, but the commitment to intentional community remained. These success stories are important. They prove that the commune impulse to live cooperatively, sustainably, and intentionally isn't inherently doomed. But success required what many early communes lacked: structure, accountability, economic viability, conflict resolution skills, and willingness to adapt. The dream could work, but only with a lot of hard, unglamorous work supporting it. But most communes failed. They collapsed under debt, drama, or sheer incompetence. Leaders turned into tyrants. Ideals curdled into cynicism. Some ended in police raids. A few literally burned down. The dream was beautiful, but dreams don't pay the bills or fix the roof or stop people from being people. Commune failures followed predictable patterns. Financial collapse was common. Communities ran out of money for property taxes, loan payments, or basic supplies. Without income-generating activities or members with outside jobs, they couldn't sustain themselves. Debt accumulated until creditors foreclosed or utilities were shut off. People scattered, leaving behind half-built structures and abandoned dreams. Morningstar Ranch in California was an infamous failure. Founded in 1966 by Lou Gottlieb, it was an open-land commune. Anyone could stay. No rules, total freedom. It quickly became chaos. Hundreds of people showed up, many with serious drug problems or mental health issues. There was no sanitation, no organization, no way to manage the influx. Crime increased. The county condemned the property for health violations. Then eventually it was forcibly closed. It's like throwing a party and announcing that anyone can come and stay forever, then being shocked when your house gets trashed. Hippie Commune in San Francisco lasted decades, but ended in spectacular betrayal. Founded on principles of polyfidelity, closed-group marriage, it developed into a cult of personality around founder Jude, John Jerome. He controlled members' lives, dictated who could sleep with whom, and demanded absolute loyalty. When he started embezzling community funds to support a secret mistress, the commune collapsed in rage and lawsuits. Drop City in Colorado, one of the earliest and most famous communes, fell apart due to internal conflict and external pressure. Founded in 1965, it attracted artists who built beautiful geodesic domes. But as it grew, tensions emerged between original members and newcomers. Hard drug use increased, violence erupted. Local authorities harassed them constantly. By 1973, it was abandoned. The domes left to decay. Fire destroyed several communes, literally. Poor electrical wiring, wood stoves, candles, and flammable structures were a dangerous combination. Some fires were accidents. Someone fell asleep with a candle burning or a wood stove overheated. Others were arson by hostile neighbors. Either way, fires devastated communities, destroying homes, possessions, and months or years of work. Some rebuilt, others gave up. Legal problems ended many communes. Drug raids led to arrests and seizures. Zoning violations resulted in forced closures. Building code enforcement made properties uninhabitable. Some communes fought in court. But legal battles were expensive and exhausting. Most couldn't afford lawyers or didn't have the organizational capacity to mount effective defenses. Leadership pathology destroyed communes from within. Charismatic founders became authoritarian, using ideology to manipulate and control. Some became sexually predatory, coercing members into relationships under the guise of spiritual teaching or therapeutic healing. When members finally recognized the abuse and spoke up, communities fractured. Some members defended the leader out of loyalty or denial. Others left traumatized. The Lyman family in Boston was particularly dark. Founded by Mel Lyman, it started as an artistic commune but devolved into a cult. Lyman declared himself God, demanded worship, and subjected members to psychological abuse. Children were neglected and abused. The members were isolated from outside contact. It took years for people to escape and longer to recover. The Lyman family wasn't a commune, it was a trap. Environmental challenges defeated some communities. Communes built in harsh climates without adequate preparation couldn't survive. Droughts killed gardens. Floods destroyed infrastructure. Wildfires forced evacuations. Nature doesn't care about your ideals. And inadequate shelter, food storage, or water systems meant disasters became catastrophes. Interpersonal toxicity collapsed many communes without any single dramatic event. Just accumulating resentment, unresolved conflicts, broken trust, and emotional exhaustion. People stopped communicating, stopped participating, stopped caring. The community withered not with a bang, but with a whimper. Members drifting away until no one was left. Some failures were preventable. Better planning, clear rules, financial management, and conflict resolution could have saved many communes. But others were doomed from conception, built on fantasies, populated by damaged people, led by narcissists, or simply unlucky in timing and circumstance. The failures outnumbered the successes dramatically. For every commune still standing, dozens collapsed. But failure doesn't mean the attempt was worthless. Each failed commune taught lessons, refined ideas, and influenced what came after. Progress is built on ruins. The question was whether anyone learned from the failures or just repeated the same mistakes with different people. Not all communes were harmless. Some became cults. A charismatic leader, isolation, groupthink, and suddenly you're in dangerous territory. Members were manipulated, had you abused, controlled. What started as liberation became captivity. These weren't communes. They were traps dressed in love beads and incense. The line between commune and cult was often blurry. Both involved collective living, shared ideology, and rejection of mainstream society. But cults added coercion, manipulation, and authoritarian control. Members couldn't leave freely. Questioning was punished. The leader's word was absolute. And often abuse, psychological, financial, physical, sexual, was systemic. Synanon started as a drug rehabilitation program in the late 1950s, but evolved into a dangerous cult by the 1970s. Founder Charles Dederich created an isolated community where members were subjected to aggressive encounter therapy, forbidden from leaving, and eventually encouraged to commit violence against critics. Synanon members beat opponents with baseball bats and placed a rattlesnake in a lawyer's mailbox. It was communal living mixed with organized crime. It's like joining a self-help group that slowly turns into a prison where the warden thinks he's Jesus. The People's Temple, led by Jim Jones, began as a progressive church and commune. Members shared resources, worked collectively, and pursued racial justice. But Jones became increasingly paranoid and authoritarian. He moved the community to Jonestown in Guyana, isolating them completely. In 1978, he ordered a mass murder-suicide, killing over 900 people, including children. Jonestown is the ultimate cautionary tale of how communes can become death traps. Rajneeshpuram in Oregon started promisingly as followers of Guru Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh built an intentional community in the early 1980s. They constructed infrastructure, attracted thousands of members, and practiced open sexuality and meditation. But the leadership became aggressive and paranoid, engaging in bioterrorism, wiretapping, and attempted murder. Federal authorities raided the compound and Rajneesh was deported. The commune collapsed in scandal. What turned communes into cults? Usually a charismatic leader who positioned themselves as enlightened, divinely inspired, or uniquely wise. Members were taught that the leader had special access to truth. Questioning them was spiritual failure or ego resistance. This created a power dynamic where the leader was unaccountable and members were controlled. Isolation was key. The cults cut members off from outside influences, family, friends, media, alternative perspectives. Physically, they might relocate to remote areas. Socially, they'd demonize outsiders as unenlightened or dangerous. Emotionally, they'd create intense in-group loyalty and out-group hostility. Members became dependent on the cult for identity, purpose, and belonging. Thought control followed. Cults demanded ideological conformity, punishing dissent through public shaming, social exclusion, or re-education. Members policed each other, reporting doubts or disloyalty. Independent thinking was discouraged. Group beliefs became unchallengeable reality maintained through repetition, ritual, and peer pressure. Financial exploitation was common. Members turned over assets, worked without pay, or fundraised aggressively for the leader. Money flowed upward while members lived in poverty. Leaders lived luxuriously. Expensive cars, multiple homes, lavish lifestyles while preaching simplicity and sacrifice to followers. Sexual abuse was endemic in many cults. Leaders claimed spiritual authority to demand sexual access to members. This was framed as healing, enlightenment, or service. Consent was coerced through ideology and power dynamics. Women especially were victimized, though men and children were also abused. Cult structures protected abusers and silenced victims. Children suffered immensely in cults. They were subjected to harsh discipline, neglected, denied education, and sometimes abused. Cult leaders controlled family structures, sometimes separating children from parents or reassigning them to other adults. Many cult children grew up traumatized, struggling to adapt to normal society after escaping or being rescued. Leaving a cult was extremely difficult. Members faced threats, harassment, and shunning. They had been psychologically conditioned to fear the outside world and believed they couldn't survive without the group. Some cults physically prevented departures, posting guards, or pursuing escapees. Even after leaving, former members struggled with PTSD, guilt, and difficulty trusting. Not every authoritarian commune was a full cult, but many had cult-like elements. The commune movement's rejection of hierarchy and structure ironically made it vulnerable to charismatic leaders who exploited that vacuum. Without accountability mechanisms, leaders could become tyrants. Without clear norms, abuse could be rationalized as enlightenment. The cult legacy haunts the commune movement. It discredited intentional communities and made people skeptical of alternative lifestyles. Parents feared their children joining communes, suspecting they were cults in disguise. This suspicion wasn't entirely unfair. Enough communes did become cults that caution was warranted. The lesson is harsh. Liberation requires structure. Freedom requires boundaries. Community requires accountability. Without these, you don't get utopia. You get Lord of the Flies with better music. The children raised on communes have mixed feelings. Some remember it as magical, freedom, nature, community. Others remember neglect, instability, and trauma. Many spent their adult lives processing what it meant to grow up outside the mainstream. Some returned to conventional life. Others carried the commune spirit forward in healthier ways. The commune kids had childhoods unlike anything mainstream society offered. They grew up barefoot, dirty, and free. They climbed trees, swam in rivers, and explored forests without adult supervision. They learned to garden, build, and cook from a young age. They witnessed birth, death, and the full spectrum of human emotion. For some, this was paradise. I never wore shoes until I was 8, one former commune kid recalls. I knew every plant in the forest, every edible berry, every animal track. I felt connected to the earth in a way my own children never will. That sense of freedom and natural connection is what many remember most fondly. It's like growing up in Narnia, except Narnia has composting toilets and your parents are often high. But for others, the freedom was neglect. Parents were too busy with commune drama, too high at or too checked out to provide consistent care. Kids raised themselves, learned from other kids, and fell through the cracks. Nobody knew where I was or what I was doing. Another former commune kid says, I could have died and it would have been hours before anyone noticed. Education was hit or miss. Some communes provided rich learning environments, adults teaching skills, encouraging curiosity, facilitating projects. Others provided nothing. Kids grew up functionally illiterate, lacking basic math, unable to write coherently. When they eventually entered mainstream schools, they were years behind, struggling academically and socially. Socialization was strange. Commune kids grew up with different norms. Nudity was normal. Adults arguing or crying was normal. Open drug use was normal. When they encountered mainstream kids, the culture shock was profound. They were teased for their clothes, their smell, their weird ideas. Many felt like aliens trying to pass as human. Boundaries were often non-existent. Kids witnessed adult sexuality. Sometimes walked in on parents having sex. Sometimes we are in the same room. This wasn't always traumatic. Human sexuality is natural, but it was confusing. Where were the lines? What was appropriate? Many commune kids grew up with distorted ideas about privacy and consent. Some experienced or witnessed abuse, sexual abuse by adults or older kids, physical abuse disguised as free-form discipline, emotional abuse through neglect or manipulation. Commune structures often protected abusers, ideology about not judging, distrust of authorities, loyalty to community over children. Victims had nowhere to turn. Material poverty was normal. Commune kids wore hand-me-downs, ate simple food, and owned few possessions. Some accepted this as values-based simplicity. Others felt deprived, especially when comparing themselves to kids in town with toys, nice clothes, and full meals. The poverty wasn't always chosen. It was just the reality of commune life. As adults, commune kids took divergent paths. Some rejected everything about their upbringing, becoming conventional, even conservative. They wanted stability, structure, normalcy they'd never had. They became accountants, suburban parents, and churchgoers. The rebellion against their parents' rebellion. Others embraced their roots, continuing the values, if not the lifestyle. They became organic farmers, activists, community organizers, and artists. They carried forward the idealism, but with more pragmatism, learning from their parents' mistakes. Many struggled with identity. I'm from a commune isn't a normal answer to where are you from. They felt like perpetual outsiders, not quite fitting in mainstream society, but also unable to return to commune life. They built hybrid lives, taking what worked from both worlds. Relationships were complicated. Some commune kids had trust issues after witnessing their parents' chaotic relationships and betrayals. Others embraced polyamory or alternative relationship structures, having seen them work or at least having been exposed to them. Conventional monogamy felt alien to some, natural to others. Therapy became common. Processing commune childhoods, the good, the bad, the weird, took years. Therapists often struggled to understand. My therapist kept asking if it was a cult. One former commune kid jokes, and I'd say no, it was just complicated. The commune kid's perspective is valuable. They lived the experiment. They can say what worked, what failed, what left scars, and what left gifts. Their experiences are more nuanced than either the idealization or condemnation of commune life. They know it was both beautiful and broken, liberating and damaging, magical and traumatic, sometimes all at once. Hippie communes didn't change the world, but they did leave a mark. They influenced organic farming, co-housing movements, environmentalism and alternative lifestyles. They asked important questions about community, consumption, and what it means to live well. Even if they failed, they tried, and that mattered. The commune movement's most tangible legacy is in agriculture. Communes pioneered organic farming when it was fringe and weird. They rejected pesticides, chemical fertilizers, and industrial methods. They composted, rotated crops, and worked with nature rather than against it. Today, organic farming is mainstream, a multi-billion-dollar industry. That transformation has roots in commune gardens. Communes also popularized vegetarianism and whole foods eating. Before communes made it a lifestyle, vegetarianism was rare in America. Communes demonstrated that you could thrive without meat, that plant-based diets were viable. They influenced food co-ops, farmers' markets, and the natural foods movement. Whole Foods exists partly because communes normalized this way of eating. It's like they were the beta testers for lifestyle choices that eventually got mainstream release. The co-housing movement emerged directly from commune experiences. People who had lived communally wanted some of these benefits. Shared resources, community support, collective decision-making without the chaos and lack of privacy. Co-housing communities developed private homes with shared common spaces, collaborative but bounded. This model works because it learned from commune failures. Environmentalism was deeply influenced by commune values: living lightly on the land, sustainability, renewable energy, conservation. These weren't mainstream ideas in the 1960s. Communes practiced them, proving they were possible if difficult. The back-to-the-land ethic influenced generations of environmentalists, homesteaders, and sustainability advocates. Communes normalized alternative family structures: single parents, same-sex couples, polyamorous families, chosen families, all existed before communes, but were deeply stigmatized. Communes demonstrated that families could look different and still function. This cultural shift helped pave the way for broader acceptance, even if slowly and incompletely. The DIY ethos came from communes: building your own shelter, growing your own food, making your own clothes, fixing your own tools. Communes taught that you didn't need to buy everything or hire experts for everything. This philosophy influenced the maker movement, DIY culture, and the rejection of planned obsolescence. Intentional community as a concept was mainstreamed. Communes showed that people could choose who they lived with and how. Yet rather than accepting default nuclear family isolation, today co-housing, eco-villages, cooperative housing, and various forms of intentional community exist because communes proved the concept even if most communes themselves failed. Communes also influenced spirituality. The eclectic, personalized spirituality common today, mixing Buddhism, yoga, paganism, self-help, has roots in communes' spiritual experimentation. The idea that you can create your own spiritual path rather than following tradition is now accepted largely because communes normalized it. Music and arts were impacted too. The folk revival, jam band culture, festival culture, DIY music venues, all influenced by commune aesthetics and values. The idea that art should be participatory, communal, and accessible, rather than elite and commodified, comes partly from commune culture. Education alternatives emerged from commune experiments. Homeschooling, unschooling, democratic schools, project-based learning. Communes tried all of this. Some attempts failed spectacularly, but others showed that conventional schooling wasn't the only option. This influenced modern alternative education movements. The legacy isn't all positive. Communes also demonstrated limits and dangers. They showed that pure consensus decision-making often doesn't work. That rejection of all hierarchy can create worse hidden hierarchies. That ideology without pragmatism fails. That freedom without responsibility becomes chaos. These lessons are valuable too. Communes also left a cultural memory. They're part of the 60s mythos, representing both the era's idealism and its naivety. They appear in books, movies, documentaries, and conversations. They're a reference point for discussing alternative living, community, and social change. Perhaps most importantly, communes kept alive the idea that society could be different. That capitalism and consumerism weren't inevitable, that humans could organize differently, value different things, live different ways. Even though most communes failed, the possibility they represented didn't die. It evolved, adapted, and continues in new forms. The commune legacy is complicated. Part success, part failure, part cautionary tale, part inspiration. But it's real. The world was changed, even if not in the ways communards hoped. Communes never completely died. Today, intentional communities still exist. Smaller, smarter, more structured. They've learned from the mistakes of the past. Modern communes have rules, budgets, and boundaries. They're less about dropping out and more about opting into something different. The dream evolved. Intentional communities in the 21st century look different from their 60s predecessors. They're more likely to be in suburbs than wilderness, more organized than chaotic, more integrated with mainstream society than isolated from it. But the core impulse remains. People choosing to live cooperatively, sharing resources and decisions. Eco-villages are one modern iteration. These communities focus on sustainability, renewable energy, organic farming, ecological building, minimal environmental impact. They're serious about reducing carbon footprints and modeling sustainable living. Unlike many 60s communes, eco-villages invest in infrastructure, training, and long-term planning. They're proving that ecological living is viable with proper systems. It's like Communes 2.0 with all the bug fixes and a much better user interface. Co-housing communities have proliferated. These are typically clusters of private homes with extensive shared facilities, common kitchens, dining rooms, workshops, gardens, guest rooms. Residents own their homes but collaborate on communal spaces and activities. This balances privacy with community, learning from communes that too much togetherness breeds conflict. You get your own bathroom, your own bedroom, your own space to retreat to when communal life becomes overwhelming. But you also have neighbors who actually know your name, who share meals with you, who help when you need it. Co-ops remain popular, especially in urban areas. Housing cooperatives where residents collectively own and manage buildings. Food cooperatives where members share in running stores. Work cooperatives where employees own businesses. These aren't communes in the traditional sense, but they embody communal values, democratic control, shared ownership, collective benefit. They take the best ideas from commune living and apply them to specific domains without requiring total lifestyle commitment. Modern intentional communities are more diverse. Many 60s communes were predominantly white. Today's communities are more likely to include people of color, though racial diversity remains a challenge. LGBTQ+ folks find acceptance in many intentional communities where mainstream society still struggles. Age diversity has improved as communities recognize the value of having children, adults and elders together, learning from the 60s mistake of being dominated by one generation. Technology has changed things too. Modern communities use online tools for communication, decision-making, and coordination. They can research best practices, connect with other communities, and access resources unavailable to 60s communes. Information sharing prevents each community from having to reinvent every wheel. Someone in Oregon can learn from someone in North Carolina about solar panel installation or conflict resolution techniques. Legal and financial structures are more sophisticated. Modern communities often incorporate as LLCs, non-profits, or land trusts. They have bylaws, membership agreements, conflict resolution procedures. They plan financially, maintain reserves, and invest strategically. The ideological rejection of structure has been replaced by recognition that structure enables sustainability. You can't run on good vibes and wishful thinking forever. Work and income are handled differently. Modern community members typically have outside jobs and contribute money to collective expenses. Few communities aim for complete self-sufficiency. They recognize that participating in the broader economy provides stability. This pragmatism means less poverty and more resources for community projects. People aren't starving or freezing because they refuse to engage with capitalism. Some modern communities are explicitly therapeutic or recovery-focused. They provide structure and support for people healing from addiction, trauma, or mental health challenges. These aren't just places to live. They're intentional healing environments with professional support. They learned from the 60s that you can't heal serious problems with meditation and good intentions alone. Religious and spiritual communities continue. Buddhist sanghas, Christian intentional communities, Jewish kibbutzim-inspired groups. These combine shared living with shared faith, finding meaning in both community and practice. They tend to be more stable because religious frameworks provide identity and structure that purely secular communes often lack. The Fellowship for Intentional Community maintains a directory of hundreds of active communities in North America alone. They range from tiny groups sharing a house to established villages with infrastructure and decades of history. The diversity is remarkable. Urban and rural, secular and religious, ecological and artistic, multi-generational and age-specific. Modern communities face different challenges. Rising land costs make starting communities harder. Zoning laws restrict communal living in many areas, treating it as a violation of single-family housing requirements. Aging original members in long-standing communities need care, raising questions about elder support without institutional resources. Integrating new members remains difficult. How do you bring fresh blood into an established community without disrupting culture? But these communities persist, adapt, and sometimes thrive. The internet has also enabled virtual intentional community. People committed to shared values and mutual support but living separately. Online communities offer connection without requiring physical proximity. This doesn't replace face-to-face community, but it demonstrates that communal impulses find expression even in digital space. Discord servers, Facebook groups, and online forums create belonging for people who can't or won't relocate. What's clear is that the desire for intentional community didn't die with the 60s. People still crave connection, meaning, and alternatives to isolated nuclear family living. They're still willing to sacrifice some autonomy for collective benefit. They're still asking, can we live differently? Can we build something better together? The answer modern communities provide is cautiously optimistic. Yes, if you're realistic, organized, and committed. The dream didn't die, it just grew up. Pop culture painted communes as either utopian paradises or drug-fueled disasters. The truth was somewhere in between. They were messy human experiments in living differently. Some people found meaning, others found misery. Most found a little of both. They weren't perfect, but they were real. The romantic view of communes imagines beautiful people in flowing clothes, living in harmony with nature, freed from society's constraints, making love and music under starry skies. This image persists in media, nostalgia, and cultural memory. It's not entirely false moments like that happened, but it wasn't the whole story or even most of it. The cynical view dismisses communes as naive kids playing house, destined to fail because human nature makes cooperation impossible. Critics point to the collapse rate, the drug use, the conflict. They say communes prove that alternative living doesn't work, that capitalism and conventional family structures exist because they're the only systems that function. This view is also incomplete. It's like judging all restaurants by the ones that failed in their first year while ignoring the successful ones that have been serving customers for decades. What we got wrong is assuming communes were uniform. There were thousands of communes, each unique. Some were rural, others urban. Some religious, others secular. Some rigidly structured, others anarchic. Some lasted decades, others weeks. Generalizing about communes is like generalizing about cities or families. The variation was enormous. We got wrong the idea that communes rejected all structure. Many tried, but successful ones developed organization, rules, and systems. The failure wasn't in having structure. It was in pretending structure didn't exist while informal hierarchies formed anyway. The communes that admitted they needed leadership, accountability, and clear expectations were the ones that survived. We got wrong that communes were escapist. Most weren't fleeing responsibility. They were pursuing a vision of better living. They worked incredibly hard, often harder than in conventional jobs. The perception of laziness came from people who'd never tried farming, building, or maintaining community without modern conveniences. Try hand-digging a latrine or hauling water from a well before you call someone lazy. We got wrong that free love meant constant orgies. Sexual experimentation happened, but so did emotional processing, heartbreak, jealousy, and eventually many communes developing relationship guidelines and boundaries. The sexual revolution was more complicated than everyone sleeping with everyone. It was about questioning ownership and possession, even when that questioning led to pain. We got wrong that everyone on communes was young. While youth dominated, older people participated too, offering wisdom, skills, and perspective. Intergenerational communes functioned better than age-homogeneous ones. The grandmothers who knew how to can vegetables and the grandfathers who actually understood carpentry were invaluable. We got wrong the drug narrative. Yes. Drugs were present, but they weren't universal or constant. Some communes prohibited drugs entirely. Others used them ritually rather than recreationally. The stereotype of permanently stoned hippies obscures that many commune members were stone-cold sober and deeply pragmatic about survival. We got wrong that communes failed completely. While most dissolved, they succeeded in other ways. They taught member skills that lasted a lifetime. They forged friendships that endured for decades. They demonstrated possibilities that influenced culture broadly. They pioneered practices now mainstream. Failure to last forever doesn't equal failure. Absolutely. We got wrong that communes were politically unified. Communes ranged from far left to apolitical to surprisingly conservative in some ways. Some were activists, organizing protests and supporting causes. Others were escapist, wanting nothing to do with politics. Political assumptions about commune life don't capture the diversity of ideological positions within the movement. We got wrong that communes were all white middle-class kids. While white people dominated, working-class communards existed, as did people of color, though in smaller numbers. The class and race demographics were problematic, but not as monolithic as stereotypes suggest. And many communards came from working-class backgrounds, even if they'd been to college. We got wrong that communes had nothing to teach mainstream society. In fact, they pioneered practices now mainstream. Organic agriculture, renewable energy, co-housing, cooperative economics, mindfulness practices, alternative medicine integration. Dismissing communes as failures ignores their substantial cultural contributions that shape how millions live today. We got wrong that commune life was either bliss or misery. For most people it was neither. It was complicated, difficult, occasionally transcendent, often mundane and deeply human. The boring truth is that commune life was like most life, a mix of good and bad, success and failure, joy and suffering. Wake up, do chores, argue about something stupid, share a meal, play music, go to bed, repeat. We got wrong that communes were about rejecting family. Many were about redefining family, expanding it beyond blood relations, creating chosen families, and exploring what kinship could mean. This wasn't rejection, but reimagination. The idea that family is who you choose, not just who you're born to, has become widely accepted, partly because communes normalized it. We got wrong the timeline. We think of communes as a 60s phenomenon, but they existed before and continued after. The Shakers, the Nida community, Brook Farm. American history is full of communal experiments. The 60s surge was remarkable, but not the whole story. Intentional communities have existed for centuries and continue today. What we got right is that communes represented genuine longing for something better. Connection, meaning, purpose, community. That longing is real and important, not naive or foolish. Whether communes satisfied it is debatable, but the impulse was and remains valid. People want to belong. They want to matter. They want to live authentically, connected to others and to something larger than themselves. Communes attempted to meet those needs. They didn't always succeed, but they tried, and trying matters. The attempt itself is valuable, even when it fails. So, could you have made it in a hippie commune? Could you handle the lack of privacy, the endless lentils, the group meetings that never end? Oh, the composting toilet, the free love drama, the winter cold, and the relentless optimism in the face of obvious failure? Maybe, but probably not. And that's okay, because the people who tried, whether they succeeded or failed, at least had the guts to imagine a different world. Let's be honest, most of us today couldn't last a week on a 1970s commune. We're too soft, too dependent on comfort, too accustomed to hot showers and privacy and instant gratification. The prospect of sleeping in a yurt with 12 people and no phone charger would send us running for the nearest Starbucks. You think you'd embrace communal living until you realize communal living means someone else's feet 3 inches from your face while you sleep. You think you'd love organic farming until your back is screaming and dinner is the same lentil slop you ate yesterday and will eat tomorrow. It's easy to romanticize from a distance with running water and central heating and a functioning toilet just down the hall. But it's worth imagining. Would you accept the outhouse? Would you willingly give up meat, hot showers, and personal space? Would you attend 3-hour consensus meetings about whether to plant tomatoes or beans? Would you compost human waste, share your partner, and trust your health to herbal remedies and hope? Could you handle the boredom? Because for all the talk of freedom and adventure, commune life was often tedious. Endless chores, repetitive labor, the same faces, the same conversations, no Netflix, no smartphones. No escape except walking into the woods and hoping not to get lost. Just you, the dirt, and the existential question of whether this is really better than the suburban life you fled. Could you handle the conflict? Living intimately with strangers means constant friction. Could you navigate jealousy, resentment, and personality clashes without storming off or punching someone? Could you sit in talking circles processing feelings until you wanted to scream, maintaining your composure while someone who never does dishes explains their feelings about doing dishes for 45 minutes? Could you handle the poverty, not the chosen simplicity, actual poverty, being hungry, being cold, not having medical care when you're sick, watching your children suffer because your ideals prioritized authenticity over their well-being? Could you watch a toothache turn into a full infection because you couldn't afford a dentist and ideology said you shouldn't need one? Could you handle the physical labor? Farming isn't yoga in a garden. It's backbreaking, repetitive, relentless work that leaves you exhausted and covered in dirt. Building isn't a weekend DIY project. It's dangerous, difficult work with inadequate tools and minimal knowledge. Hauling water, chopping firewood, digging latrines. These aren't romantic, they're just hard. Could you handle the lack of alone time? Never being by yourself, never having silence, never escaping other people's emotions and needs and presence. For introverts, this alone would be torture. Even for extroverts, the constant social obligation becomes exhausting. There's nowhere to hide, nowhere to decompress, nowhere to just be yourself without an audience. Most of us would fail one of these tests. We'd realize that ideology doesn't warm you in winter, that good vibes don't fix a leaky roof, and that communal living requires skills, patience, and sacrifice we don't possess. We'd pack our bags after the first cold night, the first serious conflict, the first bout of food poisoning from improperly preserved vegetables. And that's not a moral failure. Modern life, for all its problems, provides real benefits. Comfort, convenience, opportunity, stability. Rejecting all of it for a life of hardship requires either desperation or conviction most people don't have. There's no shame in admitting you need indoor plumbing and personal space to be functional. The people who made it, who stuck with communes despite everything, were remarkable. They endured discomfort, overcame conflicts, developed skills, and built something meaningful. Whether their communes lasted or collapsed, they tried. They bet their lives on a different possibility. That takes courage, stubbornness, and a willingness to suffer for your beliefs. The ones who left weren't weak or disloyal. They were realistic. They recognized that the dream wasn't working for them, and they made the hard choice to walk away. That takes courage too. Admitting you were wrong, starting over, integrating a strange chapter into a conventional life. Leaving isn't giving up. It's recognizing your limits and choosing survival. So, no, most of us wouldn't have survived commune life. We'd have been on the first bus out after experiencing one winter, one bout of dysentery, one 3-hour meeting about goat names. But we can still appreciate what the experiment meant. It asked essential questions. Do we have to live this way? Can community replace isolation? Can we build lives around meaning instead of money? Can we organize society differently? Communes didn't answer these questions definitively, but they tried, and their attempts revealed both possibilities and limitations. They showed us what humans are capable of: the good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly, the generosity and the selfishness, the wisdom and the foolishness, the love and the cruelty. Tonight, as you drift off in your comfortable bed with climate control and indoor plumbing, maybe think about the people who gave those things up trying to build something better. They failed more often than they succeeded. They made mistakes. They hurt each other and themselves. They were cold, hungry, frustrated, and often miserable. But they also laughed around fires, made music together, raised children in community, and experienced moments of genuine connection that many of us never find in our isolated, convenient lives. They were messy, complicated, flawed humans trying their best, just like the rest of us. Maybe we wouldn't survive a hippie commune, but maybe the real question is, what would we be willing to sacrifice for a life more connected, more meaningful, more real? The communes dared to ask. Most of us never do. We accept the default, the path of least resistance, the life we're handed. And maybe that's fine. Maybe that's even wise. But somewhere, someone is still asking those questions, still building, still trying, still believing that another world is possible, even if this attempt fails like all the others. And maybe that stubborn hope, that refusal to accept that this is as good as it gets, is worth something. Even if it leads nowhere, even if it ends in failure, even if we're all just fumbling in the dark, looking for warmth, looking for connection, looking for home. So tonight, as you settle into your clean bed with your thermostat set to exactly the right temperature, your refrigerator humming with fresh food just a few steps away, and your bathroom with its functioning toilet and hot shower waiting for you in the morning, maybe take a moment to think about the communards who tried to build something different. They woke up cold, they went to bed hungry. They lived without privacy, without comfort, without certainty that tomorrow would be better than today. They endured conflict and discomfort and doubt. They watched their gardens fail, their structures collapse, and their relationships fracture. They got sick without doctors. They froze without proper heating. They worked until their bodies broke down, and they kept working because stopping meant everyone suffered. But they also experienced things most of us never will. They knew what it felt like to truly depend on community, to share labor, resources, and decisions together even when it was agonizingly difficult. They felt the satisfaction of growing food with their own hands, of building shelter from raw materials, of creating culture and meaning without corporate mediation. They made music around fires, raised children in villages, and loved freely even when it hurt. Were they naive? Absolutely were they unprepared. Completely. Did most of them fail? Yes, but they tried. And in trying, they asked questions that still matter. How should we live? What do we owe each other? Can humans organize society around values other than profit and competition? Is there a way to be free without being alone? The communes didn't answer these questions perfectly. Most didn't answer them at all. They just collapsed into the messy reality of human limitation. But they demonstrated that asking is valuable, that experimenting with different ways of living, even when those experiments fail, teaches us something about what's possible and what's necessary. They left behind lessons written in mud and mistakes. That idealism needs pragmatism, that freedom requires structure, that community demands work, and that rejecting everything doesn't build anything. But they also left behind proof that humans hunger for connection, for meaning, for belonging to something larger than themselves. That hunger didn't die with the communes. It's still there in all of us waiting. So as you drift off tonight, warm and comfortable and alone in ways the communards never were, maybe feel a little gratitude. Gratitude for the hot water they didn't have, for the privacy they sacrificed, for the stability they couldn't build, but also gratitude for their stubborn, foolish, beautiful attempt to imagine and create a different world. Because history isn't just a record of what worked. It's also a catalogue of what we tried, what we learned, and what we're still trying to figure out. The communes failed, but the questions they asked remain unanswered. And maybe somewhere someone is still asking them, still building, still trying. And maybe that's enough. Not the success, but the trying. Not the utopia, but the dream. Not the commune that lasted forever, but the moment around the fire when everything felt possible and everyone felt connected and the world seemed just briefly like it could be remade. Sweet dreams, and remember someone somewhere once believed your comfort was worth fighting for. Even if they fought in strange ways in muddy fields with lentils and guitars and hope that refused to die. Sleep well. Good night, sweet dreams.